What's up, fam? It's Brian Castrillo. I just watched Daredevil episode 4 titled Sic Semper Systema. We're going to get into this. There's going to be obvious spoilers, so let's get down to it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's talk about it. Let's have fun. Anyways, Sic Semper Systema means thus always to the system. And this loosely translates to a system or a government can be overthrown or challenged. And this is kind of the central theme of this entire episode. Now, if you go back to the previous episode, we remember where White Tiger was taken out by someone wearing a Punisher shirt, of course, right to the temple. And then we start this episode where we see White Tiger's belongings basically being grabbed off a table and put into evidence bags. But at the end, it focuses in on his White Tiger amulet. And this is kind of where some of his powers come from. And I thought that was really interesting because right after that, we see his niece come into the hospital where Matt was. And she starts questioning him and starts talking to him about hating the cops and asking, like, who's going to do anything? And she doesn't believe anything's going to happen and something needs to be done. And, of course, Matt, we know he walked away from Daredevil. But I believe that she's going to be the one to take over the reign of White Tiger and don that outfit probably later on in the series. After that, we see more graffiti of the Kingpin and the Punisher. If you remember, it had triggered on there. And this is definitely going into the theme with the police, I believe, because a lot of them seem to have almost an obsession with the Punisher. They got tattoos of him, and they're probably the ones putting that graffiti everywhere. I would not be surprised. But then we see a man with the white mask. Now, I had to look who this guy was up because I am not familiar with the character of Muse. If you guys are, let me know in the comments, what you think about him. But what I do know is that he is a major antagonist for Daredevil and the Punisher. So I think this character is going to be interesting going forward. But he has a white mask, and it looks like blood is like almost coming from his eyes in this mask. He looks really crazy, but he's carrying a body just through a subway tunnel, and then it goes away from that, and we see where Matt is talking to Kirsten on the roof. That, of course, is his partner, and he's on the phone on the roof where he lives, and he's holding his ear that was fell off from his previous fight. And again, I believe Matt is really thinking about why he left Daredevil. Was this the right choice? And this is really going back and forth with him. And then we see Heather. Of course, Heather is his current love interest, and he is talking to Fisk and Vanessa. Now, remember, she was, banned from talking to anybody, so she hasn't even told Matt yet. So that, I believe, is going to be interesting later on. But Vanessa is hurt, or was hurt, when Fisk, left her. Of course, that goes back to the fight. He got in trouble, but he had to leave. And we're going to find out more as to why that is. But Fisk, we find out Fisk confronted Vanessa about an affair with some guy named Adam. Now, I don't know much about this guy, Adam, but they said to Heather, neither of them knew where he was. He just kind of disappeared. But anyways, we see Matt. He's now talking to a new client, and his name is Leroy Bradford, and he's sitting there. As Matt comes in, he notices that he's blind, and he starts making fun of him, cracking jokes at him, being really disrespectful towards Matt, and very cynical of his ability to defend him. And of course, Matt's getting annoyed with this, and his crime, which I think is kind of stupid. The cops, they showed him arrested there, but he was stealing fiddle faddle, basically caramel corn, and they were sitting there eating it in front of him while he was arrested, sitting on the step of the store where he took it from. But one thing as he's talking to Matt, he asked him, could it have been a Skrull that took this stuff? And I don't know why we're getting the Skrull. Are we getting Skrulls back into the storyline? Are these going to come back later on? I just thought that was an interesting question. But he's basically still being disrespectful towards Matt, who's trying to, question him, see if he's guilty, see what he can do to help him. And then he goes to talk to the DA, who, a little back and forth, she agrees to give him just 10 days in jail. But right before that, he was saying, absolutely not. I am not going to jail for this. This is BS. This is bogus. I only want probation. And what we find out later is that it's basically, he's talking about the system that's really hard on them, because you can't go out and get a job. It's hard because, you know, you were in trouble, and they say they want to help you out, and they put you on benefits, but then they take your benefits. And it's just like a vicious cycle, and Matt is starting to realize this. But we now see Matt, he confronts Officer Powell, and of course he's the one who was fighting with, you know, Hector Ayala, the White Tiger, and he confronts him, and he talks about Hector's death, and of course Powell says he doesn't know anything, and there's a little bit of threats back and forth. It's kind of interesting. Now we see Fisk, and he talks about the harbor, how it's kind of fallen. He has these grand schemes of building it and making it better again for everybody, and he's talking about getting rid of the mafia and how they're a lot of trouble. We come back to Leroy, and he's speaking like on those hardships that I told you about, and how he's upset on the 10 days. The 10 days was not good enough. But in it, considering his history, I see why Matt was like, what are you doing? You know, 10 days. You could be in there a lot longer for all the stuff that you got in trouble from before. Now we see Blake. This is, you know, Fisk's, you know, right-hand man, and he's apologizing because back earlier we saw him at the bar getting drunk or whatever, and he gave up information about Fisk. This got leaked out, and it basically embarrassed Fisk, and Fisk was pissed off. But he apologized and said that, you know, I don't deserve anything, just let me go. I deserve anything you do to me. It was my fault. But Fisk kind of admired that he was owning up to that, and the loyalty that he was showing him, and he basically, Fisk decides to keep him, and we all know what Fisk is capable of. But and then we start to see more of the videos where they're talking to people on the street, and they seem to be losing faith in you know, the Kingpin's ability to run the city and what he's able to do, and it just kind of growing back and forth, and but there's a little disdain in the streets. Now we see Murdoch again, and he's walking around, and he's of course, there's no way you can see. I don't know how he found it, but he hears a bottle, and it must have tapped on the bullet casing that he was looking for, but he actually finds it, which is weird. And it has a skull on the bullet casing. Of course, this is one of Frank Castle's. And why you would want to put your own calling card on, I don't know. But I think that's weird, because then you're basically admitting to anything that happens. But anyways, he finds Frank in like this old building, kind of like in the basement. He's disheveled. His hair is grown out really long. He's got, you know, full facial hair. He does not look like the Punisher that we've seen before, but it is so good to see John Bernthal in the fucking MCU again. Oh my God. He is the perfect epitome of what the Punisher is. But now, you know, he's talking to him. They're going back and forth. Frank, Matt's saying how, you know, why he doesn't want to be Daredevil, and the Punisher, Frank Castle, he's basically calling him bullshit, and he was saying how he was going to let the system save, you know, everything, and he was talking about, well, did they save your friend? And he's talking about, of course, Foggy Nelson, and he's calling Matt out, and then he talks about his boy, and how, you know, they took Frank's boy out, and how that affected him, and why he wanted to get back. And Frank was just really being forceful and telling him, you need to bring back who you are. Quit being, you know, quit bullshitting yourself, essentially. And get Bullseye didn't deserve life. He deserved to basically be taken out. We know Frank's MO. Then we see Fisk, you know, he's talking about his hardship, and he's talking to Heather about losing faith in the system. Now we see Matt on the roof, and he's you know, practicing being Daredevil, using his, you know, his fighting skills or whatever. And then we see Fisk, and he's having dinner, and there is Adam. He's locked up in some cell somewhere. And I got questions like, what happened with that? Who is Muse? Tell me in the comments, like, what you think of Muse, because he, at the end, had that guy. He's hooked up to some drainage system, and he's draining out the insides of his body, which is wild. And why was Frank Castle in there? Daredevil clearly knew where he was. What has happened since we last seen him? Anyways, thank you guys for watching. I love you guys. I'll see you in the next one.